Welcome to Work Like a Human, a podcast from Go Innovation.
Welcome back to Work Like a Human. My name is Rory. I'm an executive coach and I'm the host. I have conversations with people who are exploring what it looks like to be more human in our work because we spend so much time doing work. And today I've got a special guest. His name is Dan Owolabi. He's a friend of mine. He is a leader and a leadership development professional who has written a book called Authentic Leadership. And before we step into the conversation, I want you to think for a moment about what authenticity means to you. What does it look like for you to show up as authentic in your relationships or in your work? What's the difference between authenticity and inauthenticity? As a coach, I help people think about their executive presence, how they show up in, especially in work contexts. And I think there's a misconception that authenticity means being who I am, myself, all of the time, hashtag no filter. And I don't think that's quite right. I think in some cases it's actually really counterproductive. And if that's intriguing to you, the idea that authenticity might not mean just being yourself and saying all the time what you think. If that sounds maybe counterintuitive or maybe you even disagree, I encourage you to stick with me through the rest of my conversation with Dan because we talk about this. So let's go ahead and step into the interview now. Good morning, Dan. I'm so glad that you were able to join me for this conversation.
It's good to be here.
Maybe just start, give us the bird's eye view. What is the work that you do?
Yeah, so I do a couple things. Like a lot of people, I'm the executive director of Branches Worldwide. So Branches Worldwide is an international faith-based nonprofit that works with 30 different leaders in 30 different countries. It's exciting work. It takes me to different places around the world, so it's a ton of fun there. I have my own business. It's called Owolabi Leadership. We do coaching, consulting, keynote speeches. I just wrote a book as part of Owolabi Leadership. And then I'm a husband. I've got a wife, 13 years. I've got two beautiful girls, 3 or 4 now, and 7. So I'm excited by that. That's a huge responsibility. Those are the things I'm involved with on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, and my wife and I have been privileged to have you and your wife here in our house, and really good. So let's start with Branches Worldwide. Where does the name come from?
Yeah, so the name comes from John 15, where Jesus says, "I am the vine and you are the branches." The idea is that there are leaders around the world who love Jesus, they love their community, and they love their business. They're leading, thriving businesses, and they want to use their business as a mission to reach their community.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we identify them, come alongside them, and basically stitch these leaders together with the vine of Christ. Because that's the one thing across cultures, across industries, we all have in common is that we love Jesus. So that's where John 15:5 comes in.
We've got a lot of people, Go Innovation is connected to people who are in the faith-based and the non-faith-based world. So I wonder, what are some of the leadership challenges that you see these leaders dealing with that probably are common across the board, whether people are people of faith or not?
Yeah, COVID-19, I think, has given a sense of challenge to leaders, but also a sense of solidarity. I think when we talk to leaders in any country that we've been to, we hear the same thing over and over again, which is there's just way more uncertainty than they've ever experienced. Yeah. No one has been here before, and so they have to juggle, normal challenges, and then on top of that, challenges of your business. But then one by one, they've all talked about relying on Christ because he got them this far. He didn't bring them this far to destroy them. And so trusting that he's going to take them to the next step, whether, and this is something we hear over and over again, whether it means losing their business or not, remaining faithful to Christ is an overarching theme that we hear from people over and over again. So this business isn't mine. These employees aren't mine. I'm open-handed. And so that's been encouraging.
Yeah, and I know, you and I have conversations with a lot of leaders, and it's really important for leaders to be super clear on the values that anchor them, right? Like, why are they doing what they're doing? Because in a sea change crisis like COVID-19 presents, those things form an anchor, and they allow you to, rather than react with panic, you can respond with purpose. And then, you can be clear, this is our vision, this is why we do it. That may not be changing, but our strategies need to adapt. So for you, as you think about where you've come from to this point, what are some of those guiding principles or values that, like, maybe you use them to make decisions over and over, you depend on them?
There's a couple that I have. I'm glad you're bringing that up. For me personally, there's 2 that come to mind. The first is relationships. I think in anything that I do, tough decisions, easy decisions, whatever, I want to make sure that I keep relationships at the forefront. Because ultimately, relationships are the thing that really brings results. That's why I'm in this. The people are the product. I want to make sure that I'm changing lives. And so whatever I'm pursuing, if I destroy relationships in the process, then I'm not doing a great job. There's ways to make difficult decisions like firing people or having to, give disappointing news and still maintain relationships in the process. So that's my goal. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and this is something that I'm learning more and more, is results. Being able to be a good steward with what God's given you and make difficult decisions regarding your time, regarding your resources, and say, you know what I want to do at the end of the day is I want to produce results that I can point to. And I can look at God and look at people in my family and say, I did everything I could with what he gave me, and here's what I produced.
So talk to me a little bit then about Owolabi leadership. You said you do keynotes, obviously you have a book, and I definitely want to ask you about the book. But maybe before we get to the book, what tends to be the focus of your work in that realm?
With Owolabi leadership, I do domestically with what Branches Worldwide does internationally. And so it's a lot of one-on-one coaching. It's a lot of mentoring. What I find, and this is something I talk about in the book, is that CEOs, executives, they're just regular people given a ton of responsibility. And they might have some expertise, but oftentimes they're leading in areas in ways they've never experienced and they've never been before. And so being able to have a confidant, someone who can speak to them and actually tell them the truth in a way that they can hear it, makes a huge difference. So there's that. And then keynote speaking. Oftentimes businesses and organizations will need someone that they trust to come in and essentially repeat the same things that they say in their board meetings and staff meetings, but in a way that's compelling and dynamic, and it's not from their boss, And so I help with that as well.
So I've got to confess, I'm a little bit of a keynote skeptic. If someone asks me to give a keynote, I certainly will. I'm probably not going to say no. But on the other hand, it's a whole industry, and sometimes I get a little weary. I'm like, are people seeing results from this? Because people get paid a lot of money to come in and deliver a 45-minute keynote, and I'm like, a bunch of people listened, it felt nice, they walked away. I don't know how much culture change is going to happen. So what are the circumstances, in your opinion or in your experience, that need to sort of line up to make sure that a keynote is actually a good investment in the culture of a company and organization?
I think it has to do with expectations going into it. So, for me, I think it's a difference between surgery and a bath, right? So coaching to me is like surgery, where you get in there and you really start messing stuff around. I mean, you start messing stuff up. You really start getting in there and trying to understand what the real problem is, getting to the root of it, ripping it out, and then fixing it, putting it back together, and then they're on healthier than they've ever been before. A keynote speech is a bath where you get inspired, you get excited, you get ready for the day. Oftentimes it's fun. You could be there all day, that kind of stuff. But in reality, it's not actually fixing the inside. And I think if you come into a keynote speech expecting to have a massive culture change, you're missing the boat. But I think it's important that you are inspired on a regular basis. And if your employer can bring someone in to inspire you for a moment or for a day or for a month, I mean, that's awesome. That's a great use of time and money.
It's a little bit of a reward too, right? You want to be able to celebrate what your people are doing and give them exposure to somebody that maybe casts big vision from a different perspective. So I can get that. So you mentioned, leadership challenges. Obviously, probably a lot of people are at this point tired of hearing people talking about the challenge of the pandemic, even though it's continuing to be relevant and important. It's always there. Thinking about your own journey to where you are now, what are a couple of significant challenges that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. So there's a few big ones. I played college basketball and loved it. It was a great experience, but it was also a transformational experience in that I came into it with a certain set of expectations about how well I would do on the team. And my freshman year, I tore my groin muscle. So I don't know if you've ever pulled a muscle. Pulling a muscle is tough. Pulling your groin muscle is one of the worst because you can never rest it. You're always just using it. And then tearing it is a whole nother level, right? Ooh. So, that was physically challenging, but it was also emotionally challenging. And then I realized that I had kind of buried my identity in basketball. And whenever you put your identity in anything, and I'm a person of faith, so whenever I put my identity in anything other than Christ, I'm on shaky ground. And so when that was ripped away and I lost that and I couldn't bring it back, I couldn't heal myself fast enough, I had to find really what I was made of. And that was a transformational moment for me. And I realized from that on, no matter how good I get at anything or what I do in life, never, ever, ever put your eggs in the basket of your performance or your work, because that can be taken from you really quickly, pretty suddenly. And
Yeah.
so that was a transformational moment for me.
Yeah. I just was having a coaching conversation with someone the other day, and they were saying how they were recognizing how much of some decisions they made and how they communicated with somebody was basically predicated on an unexamined belief that they needed to appear as if they like never made a mistake. I could see them like speaking it out loud and sort of hearing themselves say it and being like, oh my goodness, that sounds ridiculous, even as I say it out loud. But that to me is like that clear indicator of your identity is in your performance. And again, like whether or not what you find your identity in is faith, I think anybody listening can recognize like you have to be able to anchor your sense of self in something other than that, because like you're going to go crazy. There's always going to be somebody better than you. You're not going to be able to be flawless. Like you're always going to make a mistake, and you've got to have something to fall back and to rest on. And so what I hear you saying is your faith becomes that bedrock for you, that foundation that allows you to say my identity is not in myself, which frees me to fail, which is really, really important. Like we know from research that failure is like a prerequisite to growth and to progress. So a question that I often ask Work Like a Human guests is there a significant failure that you're willing to share that you learned from and what you learned from it?
Well, Rory, I would agree with you 100%. I mean, there's the faith component of having that anchor in Christ and having an anchor in something else other than your performance, which is just super helpful. But for the sake of growth, yeah, being able to fail on a regular basis without feeling like a failure is huge. So I think you nailed it. Yeah, a major failure of mine, I think, was when I've had a lot, but was when my first employee quit. That's something that I had never read about, never heard about. I knew it happened, and it's happened to entrepreneurs and leaders over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But when your first employee quits, it's like somebody getting divorced. Like it feels like it's hard not to take it personally.
Especially if you weren't like secretly
rejection.
hoping they would quit, right? Especially if it actually hurts, like.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you hire them, and they're excited to be on the team. You're excited to be leading for the first time because they're the first ones you hired. And so you put all your leadership chops in that, like everything you've ever read, everything you've ever done, you're doing all the one-on-ones and you're saying all the right things. And then, X number of days later, they're like, deuces, I'm out. You're not good enough for me. Like that's just a terrible feeling. And, so for me, that was challenging because then I was able to look back on that and see a lot of mistakes that I made. And one thing, I'll give you this, one big mistake that I made was that I read too much. I read too many leadership books and I did too much intellectual sort of development and not enough real life working with people. Like instead of just like getting to know her as a person, I read a book about the disc profile, and then tried to like nail her, things like that, which was, now I look back, I'm like, just be human, just be normal. And a lot of things will take care of themselves.
So speaking of reading leadership books, you've written one, Authentic Leadership. Like, tell us about this book.
Yeah, so I'm really excited by it. It's something that I've experienced for years and been trying to put words to it. But basically the book, it's called Authentic Leadership, How to Lead with Nothing to Hide, Nothing to Prove, and Nothing to Lose. And it's about insecurity at its core and how to develop authentic confidence. And one of the things I say in the book is that everybody battles insecurity. Insecurity is a lot like the feeling that runners get when they're running. See, every runner, when you're running a half marathon or a 5K, every great runner knows that they're going to get tired along the way. They know it's coming. And so the best runners prepare for it. They know at mile 6, they're going to feel this way. Mile 12, they'll feel this way. And so they're ready for it. The same thing it's the same thing with leaders. Every great leader knows that they're going to have real moments of insecurity. And so they're ready for it. They prepare for it. They know what to do when they get there. And so for me, in my leadership, I've noticed that insecurity really creeps up when I get an increase of responsibility, when things start to go really well. And all of a sudden I'm in over my head. And those are the moments, and there's different moments for a lot of other leaders, but those are the moments when I feel like I have something to hide, or I don't want to appear like I'm weak. I've got something to lose because, gosh, we've come this far. I don't want to lose it. I've got something to prove. I want to prove that I'm made for this moment and I can meet the challenges.
Yeah.
And in reality, that kind of insecurity, having something to hide, something to prove, and something to lose, that in itself sabotages your leadership.
Sure.
And then people don't trust you nearly as much as they should because you're not authentic. But authenticity then is a antidote for insecurity. And that's
So
what the
what's
book is about.
so what's the first step that somebody needs to take if they agree with you that authenticity is good, they feel like they may not be there now, they want to move towards it?
The first step is self-understanding. Being able to take a big step back, either have somebody else hold a mirror up to you, or you hold a mirror up to yourself, and understand your own struggles, your challenges, how you've gotten to where you've gotten. It's not a fluke that you're in the seat that you're in, and you have what it takes to be able to lead and succeed. But you've got to look back in your own life and identify the stories and the challenges that you've overcome, and use that to help shape your identity. So often people will lead without taking the time to examine themselves, their motives, just like you said earlier, Rory, your own values that guide you and anchor you. And if you do that first, then you're well on your way to becoming more authentic, because you're more confident in who you are and what you've been through.
Yeah. So let me maybe play with this a little bit. The idea of authenticity, I think especially younger leaders, young millennials and Generation Z, the idea of being authentic, maybe this is a stereotype, but I see it where authenticity is sort of like, I want to show up as fully me, and I don't want somebody to like give me any impression that I need to show up any differently. And so on the one hand, I like theoretically, yeah, authenticity is good. I wouldn't want to work in an environment where I felt like I had to be fake or, things like that. On the other hand, a basic premise of emotional intelligence is the ability to know others well enough to be able to play up or play down, how to relate to them for mutual success, right? Especially in like a team context, a culture context. So how do you balance the reality? Like, does authenticity mean just being exactly who you want to be all of the time and not like flexing to meet other people where they are, or is there something else?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you're bringing that up, because I think that's a common misconception of authenticity. I think when we talk about people being inauthentic, we say that they're fake, they're not being themselves. And so we think that, authenticity, just like you said, is being fully yourself all the time, unfiltered. And that's not helpful. Like, nobody wants you unfiltered. Like, nobody wants that. No. That's not helpful.
Nope.
Yeah. No, I talk about that in the book. I say this is the thing. Authenticity is being the best version of yourself in the service of other people. And so being the best version of yourself whenever you can, at all times, always in the context of serving other people. So an example I give is airline pilots. So if you've ever traveling on an airplane and there's a little bit of turbulence, what you want is for the airline pilot to be authentic. You don't want him to be 100% transparent. You don't want him to get on the
okay,
the
so
mic.
that's a really helpful distinction. You want the pilot to be authentic. You don't want them to be 100%, or even like maybe 100% candid. We talk about degree of candor. Like, you don't necessarily want them to be a 10 out of 10. Okay, right, that makes sense.
Right. Have a filter, because he could freak everything out, make it all worse. So but you also want him to be truthful, to the degree that he can without really doing some damage.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Like, we in our leadership essentials work, we have an essential called degree of candor, where you can have low candor, which is where you may be slow to speak, you're selective about what you say, maybe guarded. High candor is you're very free, quick with your words, open, and like often research by Google has found that psychological safety is that element that makes some teams excel while other teams don't. It's really not whether you have the most smart people on that team. It's whether they all feel psychologically safe. And the way that you measure that often is degree of candor. If you sense a high degree of candor in the group, but there are times when that can backfire. Like, you got the guy who tells too many jokes and you realize you're actually making racist jokes and you just feel comfortable enough that you're saying them out loud. Like, that's too candid, or just whatever. All, people that share too much information about something. So what I hear you saying is there's a difference between authenticity and absolute transparency, which that's like a very helpful distinction to me.
Right. And I've been to one of the Go Innovation clinics, and it's been super helpful. I mean, describing the degree of candor is one thing that you brought up in one of our sessions that I took back and actually used as I was working on this book, because it helped me explain a concept that I've been thinking about for a long time. So I love that. That's really good.
Oh man, I'm glad to hear that. It's been so helpful to me when I explain it to other people. They're like, oh, right, because it's like in the air. Like, you feel it, whether I can be open or closed on my communication. And again, sometimes being closed is appropriate with respect to certain things, and sometimes being open is inappropriate. It's not necessarily bad or good scale, but it's nice. Like, I'm going to remember this, that I can map authenticity to that in a way that you're describing and use that from a different angle. This is super helpful. So, Dan, I know you value your family really highly. You've got 2 girls. I'm a father of 2 girls as well. How have you been able to put appropriate boundaries in place so that you honor your commitments and time with them and your commitments to all of the different work that you're involved with?
Yeah. I was in ministry for about 10 years before this. And I mean, that's a great place to learn real boundaries, because the expectations of ministry is that you're there for the people in the church, the people in the community, but you also have to be a stellar man of God and a stellar family man. And so you have to have your own faith in order. You have to be able to lead people effectively, and you have to be able to lead your family effectively. So boundaries are critical. One of the things I do, and I learned a long time ago, was use the calendar and use it like your life depends on it. You know?
Yeah.
So my time with my girls, as much as I'd like it to be unstructured and just completely like relaxed, it's in the calendar. It's structured. I don't show it to them, but they know instinctively that between after dinner and bedtime, like I am 100% theirs. Like my phone is off, it turns off on its own. Our internet in our house actually shuts down on its own. Like we set it up. And so like no one can even, like get on Wi-Fi even if they wanted to. And then at 8:30, everything turns back on again, right? They should be in bed and that kind of stuff. So, those things are set in my calendar. I pick up my daughter from school every day that I can. That's in the calendar because I know that one-on-one time, especially on the first and second day of school, when she's super excited about what she's learning, I want to be in the car with her to kind of capitalize on those moments. And so I've realized that even though I'm traveling all over the world in different capacities and I'm leading at different levels in different places, creating those intentional moments with my family that are locked into the calendar, that's critical. And then my wife, she holds me accountable to all that. So
yeah, it occurs to me that like having some kind of even like a master class and just becoming a ninja with the calendar would be so helpful to a lot of people. Like I can't tell you the amount of people I coach, and I'm like if you don't put it on the calendar, it won't happen. Like you can't just commit to something. It gives you that measurable. And on the upside, if you can figure out what are the tactics that are going to be required to advance this strategy for this week, you can put them on the calendar and check them off, and you know with certainty whether or not you made progress because you literally figured out these are the things I have to do, and that's how I'm going to make it happen. This reminds me of a question I meant to ask you. I think there's a lot of people that would say, I have an idea for a book, I just can't find the time to do it. And I'm interested in your perspective on like what helped you be successful in getting across the finish line with that book.
Yeah. If I was going to point to anything that helped get the book done, I would say there was two things. The first one was accountability, and the second one was priority. So starting with accountability, at the beginning of 2019, I publicly said on Facebook, I am going to write a book this year. Okay. And just told anybody that would listen and told everybody. Yeah. And I was ashamed because I didn't really have a lot of like stuff together and I didn't know what I was doing. But I kept saying it out loud over and over again, I'm going to write this book. And I also had a business partner who I told her, I'm going to write this book this year. So a couple of weeks in then, my wife and I got together and we said, okay, so how are we going to make this happen? Because I was also launching a nonprofit at the same time. And what we did is we made a compromise and we said, okay, in the summertime, you're going to need probably 4 or 5 weekends, full weekends away just to write. Yeah. Because the editing process comes in August. And so we basically sat down and said, all right, in May, June, and July, here are the days that you are going to be MIA, not with the family. You're going to be away somewhere else, just writing. And so that was super helpful because then when August came and it was time to edit, I knew that I had to be ready with a lot of content, and I was. Yeah. And so that kind of accountability and also that kind of prioritization in your calendar made a big difference.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, I think you sent a newsletter out about this not that long ago, but I just read a post on LinkedIn like yesterday. And it was the host of a podcast I really like, and she said that a reader sent in this comment, or a listener sent in this comment, that their spouse had sent an email, who works at, I guess, a fairly big tech company who remained unnamed, sent an email to leaders, basically kind of trying to hold them accountable to doing more in the area of diversity and inclusion. And this floored me when I read this. The leaders, their response was, congratulations, you are now the head of our global diversity and inclusion efforts because you asked about it. And the person writing this message was basically like, my spouse like didn't say no, but also is like a little floored that this, they don't have like that their spouse didn't have special training in this area. Felt like, okay, so imagine that you are brought in as like an advisor or a coach to work with that person and whatever leaders like made that decision. How do you start to like work in that situation?
Well, it's interesting that they gave her a position that she wasn't particularly qualified for, but they thought she was qualified because she showed interest in it, which is, it says something about, their seriousness in regards to diversity.
It says something.
Yeah. And their culture of development. That kind of thing. So I think coming into it, honestly, just thinking about the kind of culture that's probably there, this wouldn't get me very far. But if I was going to be completely candid and honest with them, what I would do is I would stop and say, hey, let's not do anything right now. What we need to do is we need to get eyes to see the problem. And we need to see the seriousness. I think oftentimes when people want to address diversity and inclusion, they want action. Like, what should I do now? Where should I go? Who should I talk to? Who should we hire? Nope. You need to stop and get eyes to see the problem, understand it, pause long enough. And you see it when you start to empathize. When you say, oh, wow, like if that was me, I would be just as upset as this guy. And when you feel that, then you're free to actually, address some real things and drive actions, because your actions have purpose and direction, as opposed to just saying, I just want to do this and get it over with so everything's back to normal again.
Yeah. And I mean, I can imagine like those conversations can be so fraught. I think well-intentioned people can have different opinions about the best way to move forward in some of those areas. I think there's a lot of public-facing pressure on a lot of companies right now to just do something. And as you say, like, interesting that we talked about authenticity, and you said the place to start is self-understanding. What I hear you saying right now is the place to start is corporate self-understanding. Like at the organizational level, step back, do some significant listening, some soul searching. Practically, maybe that means some surveys and some town halls, and like get clear on what's the vision. Like, where are you going? Don't just make a quick action before you figure out where do we really want to go? What would it mean for us to feel like we're being successful in the area of diversity and inclusion? And then you can start to figure out, okay, now how will we get there? But I'm interested, given that you're in touch with so many people in different organizational contexts, surely you're having some of these conversations with people. The other thing I want to just be transparent about is I notice, and I've seen some people writing about this in places like LinkedIn, where people of color, suddenly they're being sought out to give opinions on diversity and inclusion because they're people of color. And I sense like a polarity at work where on the one hand, they're sort of like, thank you for reaching out. I want to help. This is important. On the other hand, there's some exhaustion. Like, I've been doing good leadership work for a long time, and only now that this topic has come to the forefront, this is the one you want to come talk to me about. I have opinions on other things. Like that's what I see. I could help you with other things too. I'm not only, don't pigeonhole me. So I imagine that's probably a tension. I'm interested in your perspective as a leader, a person of color. Like, what have those conversations looked like for you?
Yeah. No, that tension is there to a certain degree. One of the things I've settled a long time ago is that, we don't get to choose how we get to serve people. We might have a lot to offer, but if somebody needs something and we have the ability to provide it, we need to step up to the plate and provide that. And not take offense as to say, at some point, well, I can do other things. Well, they don't need that from us right now. What they need is an answer to this particular problem. And when we solve that for them and help them move on, then we can say, hey, here's some other things that I can offer as well. We use that as an opportunity to develop relationships. So I don't take offense to that. I think that's a great opportunity for people to get their foot in the door to some organizations that otherwise might not have given them the time of day.
Yeah, that's a really generous perspective. You're saying like a very forward-looking perspective. So with Go Innovation, we work with a lot of different kinds of organizations. We work with like faith-based organizations and non-faith-based organizations, for-profits, nonprofits. But I'm most interested in the faith-based, non-faith-based. So you have a lot of leadership experience in faith-based contexts, which is unique and helpful in a lot of ways. You work with leaders from a lot of other different contexts. I know that you've had ministry partners and still do who are like not leading in faith-based organizations, so to speak. When you think about leading and working across that difference, like being able to work well in a pluralistic context, you got people of faith, people of no faith, people of a different faith than yours. What are some things that you found helpful to like create harmony in those situations?
Yeah, the podcast that you're hosting, I think, gives a lot of insight to that question. Work like a human. Essentially, what I'm realizing is that even if you don't have a love of Jesus, or he's not the leader of your life or the forgiver of your sins, you still have empathy for the people around you. you still really care about making a difference in the world. You're still asking a lot of the same questions when it comes to your family, your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors. You want to have purpose in your everyday work. And so being able to relate with people on that level is critical.
Yeah.
When I sit across the table from a man who's, a CEO, he might not share the same faith that I do, but he's a dad and he loves his kids. He's a husband and he loves his wife. He's a citizen and he loves his country. And so for me to be able to relate with him on those levels is very, very critical. And if we can relate on the faith perspective, then that's even better. But oftentimes we can't. And I use some of those other areas as a way to sort of develop a conversation and an authentic relationship with them over time.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me a lot of people are interested to talk about faith if they don't have it. I think what they're not interested in is automatically being told what they should think, or being sort of like counted out on the basis of like a pre-selection criteria in our minds. But you're right. Work like a human. There are some things we may disagree on why those things are there, but I think all people can agree there's some things that make us human. And I think work is one of those things. Like, we have a drive to be creative, to make things, to produce some kind of significance and meaning out of our activity day to day. And our jobs don't always maybe 100% line up with what we feel that work should be for us. But work to me is like a bigger, leading my family is part of work for me. The passion project of my music is part of my work, my vocation, whatever word you want to use for it. So totally agree with you. I think there's some common ground that we share on the basis of common humanity, and building bridges on the basis of those things before playing up the sharp differences, I think tends to help. Once you get to the conversations about the differences, those conversations just take on a totally different tenor.
Yeah. The best leaders that I know do exactly what you're saying. I mean, they're the ones who are able to build bridges across multiple cultures, genders, just different areas of life, recognizing that in every relationship, there's at least one or two things that you have in common with everybody. And so your job as a leader is to find that, to work on that. And once you find that, just nail that over and over and over again, so you can develop a real relationship with them from that one thing. Just building a bridge, just like you said.
Yeah. Man, that's a good word. Well, Dan, thank you. I really appreciate your time. I know you have a lot going on, so I appreciate this. Dan's book is Authentic Leadership. You can find that Amazon, a lot of other places where you'd want to find a book. And I saw that you were working an audiobook. Is the audiobook available also, or is it in process?
It's coming this month, so we're excited. It's already recorded. It needs to be posted.
And you got to record your own audiobook, which is really great.
I did. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's great. Well, so Authentic Leadership, how to lead with nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to lose. Yeah.
Got it. Yep.
Check that out. Dan, thank you again for taking some time.
It's been fun. Thanks, Rory.